Welcome back to another edition of the Saturday to Sunday Football Podcast. I am Paul Perdichizzi, and thank you for joining me as always. Week 14 of the college football season is concluded. Championship week is next week. The playoffs, bowl season right around the corner. Here at Saturday to Sunday, we will once again cover everything wire to wire. NFL Draft Report, Devy Slant Report, the transfer portal news is heating up, NFL Rookie Report, Fantasy Dynasty Report, the usual setup for an in-season show. Let's jump right into it. Talk about what happened this past week in the college football landscape. Let's start, as we always do, with the quarterbacks. Shadu Sanders, Cam Ward. This past week, Shadu Sanders, 34-41, 438 yards, 5 touchdowns. Colorado rolled last weekend. Cam Ward, 42-38 loss to Syracuse, 349 yards and 2 touchdowns. We've been saying it for quite some time that they have distanced themselves from the rest of the pack. These two quarterbacks are going to go in the top 10. We'll see how high. I think they have a realistic chance to go in the top 5. Maybe even the top 2, depending on what teams are picking, depending on, Travis Hunter, how that kind of shakes itself out. But I think the discussion over the last week or two has started to be, where do we place these guys in relation to last year's draft class? Where do we place these guys in? Do we look at them as guys that could elevate a franchise and be a franchise quarterback? And this is where I kind of come down on it. I don't think any of them are on the Caleb Williams, Drake May, Jaden Daniels trifecta from the top of last year's draft. But I do think Shadu Sanders has more upside than J.J. McCarthy. Remember, if you've been a longtime listener, I thought he was a solid prospect. I was not in love with him. I think Shadu Sanders has got a higher ceiling than Michael Penix and Bo Nix. All of those guys went in the top 12 last year. I do think Shadu Sanders and even Cam Ward would slide in for me as 4 and 5. Then it would be J.J. McCarthy, then Michael Penix, then Bo Nix as prospects. Obviously, Bo Nix is having a really impressive rookie year after a slow start. But that's how I would see it. So I get people want to say down quarterback class. And yes, relatively speaking. But we also can't lose sight of the fact that for a while, a lot of people thought J.J. McCarthy can go top 5. Bo Nix and Michael Penix both went in the top 12. I think a lot of people are going to have Shadu Sanders and Cam Ward intertwined with either, some might have them ahead of J.J. McCarthy, some might have them after J.J. McCarthy. I think a lot will have Shadu Sanders ahead of what they thought of Michael Penix and Bo Nix last year, and I think Cam Ward too. So a lot of people were okay with with Michael Penix and Bo Nix being round 1 quarterbacks. Well, if you're okay with them being round 1 quarterbacks, I think you kind of got to be okay with Cam Ward and Shadu Sanders being top 10 picks in a down quarterback class. Now, maybe the argument stems from they're not worthy of going 1st, 2nd, or 3rd overall because they're not at the level of Caleb, Jaden, and Drake May. But not every quarterback class has Caleb, Drake May, and Jaden Daniels. So I do think there's more upside and ceiling to Shadu Sanders than people want to give him credit for. I do think the amount of people that want to see him fail because he's Deion's son, because he's been in the spotlight, I could see a scenario where the NFL and the scouts are higher on him than maybe draft Twitter is. Because they're going to look at how poor his supporting cast has been at Colorado. He not only elevated Colorado, he elevated Jacksonville State before then. He's played with a horrific offensive line. He finds a way to navigate that in terms of not impacting his great production. He has elevated Colorado to be a functional college program, score a lot of points. And if you take Travis Hunter off of that, are we sure anybody else is definitively a top 5-round prospect in the NFL draft? And I think the answer is probably a resounding no. So I think Shadu Sanders is going to have more fans than maybe draft Twitter and some draft evaluators want to give him credit for. I think Cam Ward, people are going to like the ability to make second reaction plays, the playoff structure. That's his best attribute, thrown from different arm angles, different platforms. But I do think the consistency of Shadu Sanders, the accuracy, the ball placement, the decision-making will lean in Shadu Sanders' favor. But the second reaction, off-script plays will lean towards Cam Ward, who's played with a much better supporting cast, especially this year, than Shadu Sanders has ever had. I don't see a scenario where I flip-flop them. For me, it's going to be Shadu 1. He's been number 1 since the summer. I've always liked Cam Ward, but he's gonna go in for me as number 2. I do think if Michael Penix can go where he went last year, if JJ McCarthy and Bo Nix can go where they went last year, and let's be reality, if they didn't have the 3 guys at the top of the class, it's not inconceivable that McCarthy, Penix, and Bo Nix would have even been pushed up higher. And might have all been top 10 picks last year in the NFL draft. So I think Shadu Sanders and Cam Ward are in that mix with McCarthy, with Penix, with Nix. So if those guys could be the 4th, 5th, and 6th quarterbacks in a class and still all go top 12, I think it's safe to say that most people are going to look at Shadu Sanders and Cam Ward and kind of put them in the same tier as those guys, which makes them would have been worthy of a top 12 pick last year in a stronger draft class, especially at the quarterback position, especially at the wide receiver position. So I do think they weren't going in that top 5, top 10 mix for this upcoming year. Other quarterbacks quickly want to talk about Carson Beck, that crazy Georgia game against Georgia Tech, like 8 overtimes. Carson Beck, 297 yards, 5 touchdowns. It'll be really interesting to see the Carson Beck narrative, especially if Georgia makes a little run in the college football playoff, assuming they make it, and I think they will. Beck had a lot of fans entering this season. So if he finishes the year strong, I could see a team looking at him and saying, we still like him as a prospect. I don't think he's a round 1 guy. I think he's more of a day 2 guy. But I do think there's still some season left for Beck to kind of win some more people over and kind of end on a strong note and kind of make people a little bit forget about some of the ups and downs he had there and the really poor play, decision-making, turnover-worthy plays that we had there for a period of time. And then Jackson Dart, I can't get in on him. I get it. There's some people that really like him. I don't think his arm talent is great. I think it's probably good. I saw some narrative that he had a great arm. I don't see a great arm from Jackson Dart. I see a scheme that created a lot. So Jackson Dart isn't for me is like a top 50 pick. Tell me he's a round 3 developmental guy and see what happens. Yeah, I can get in on Jackson Dart as round 3. But I wouldn't want my franchise taking him in the top first round or top 50. So for me, it becomes Cam Ward and Shadu Sanders at the top. And I don't think anybody else round 1. I'm still intrigued with the skill set of Jalen Milroe because we see a guy like Anthony Richardson play his best game maybe of his career this past week. And I still see a scenario where Jalen Milroe has a lot of traits very similar to Anthony Richardson. So I think that's why he still intrigues me I think the best bet for Jalen Milroe is probably go back to school. I think he probably will. So I'm not sure we're going to have anybody after Sanders and Ward in the top 10. I do think we'll have some guys then in the mix on day 2. Take us to the running back position. Top of the class, Ashton Genty, 226 yards and 1 touchdown. Caleb Johnson kind of struggled getting going this week. 17 carries for 45 yards, but did have 2 catches for 73 yards and a touchdown. He had a big one there. I think the question now becomes, we know there's a gap from 1 to 2. Genty's in the tier by himself. Are we getting to the point where Caleb Johnson is in a tier by himself for tier 2, and then a break, and then everybody else in terms of the other guys from 3 to 6, 3 to 7? I have Caleb Johnson and Omarion Hampton neck and neck. They would probably be in the same tier for me. But then I think it's a tier break. And then I think you have the Ohio State guys who both really struggled this past week against Michigan. You have the Ollie Gordons, the Nicholas Singletons. That would kind of be that next group. Dylan Sampson should be catapulted himself into most people's pre-draft top 10 ranks, just like Woody Marks did earlier in the year, just like Caleb Johnson catapulted in early in the year. Dylan Sampson should be in people's top 10s. 178 yards this week, but we're talking about a guy who's got 1,500 yards almost and 22 touchdowns. He's been the engine and the focal point of that Tennessee offense. And speaking of another guy who's been the focal point of their run game, Taj Brooks out of Texas Tech. He's up to over 1,500 yards and 17 touchdowns. He's going to be a day 3 guy. He's going to be a part of a committee. He's going to be an inside power gap run team. But Brooks, the leg drive, the power, the play strength, physicality, he knows how to pick up yards. He's going to be a really interesting day 3 running back for a team looking for that physical component that Brooks can provide to a football team. If we take this to the wide receiver position, we talk about Travis Hunter every week. Not sure what more there is to say. 10 catches, 116 yards, and 3 touchdowns. I think he should clearly win the Heisman Trophy. As good as Ashton Genty has been, what Travis Hunter is doing is unprecedented in college sports, in college football. So I think Hunter is going to be wide receiver 1, as much as I like Tet McMillan also. And I think he has a real chance to be the first pick in the draft if it's a team like the Jaguars or some other team that's not going to be in the quarterback market just yet for this year. I did want to talk about LeJohntay Webster out of Colorado. He's only 5'11", 167 pounds. But this past week, 11 catches, 175 yards, and 2 touchdowns. He's up to 70 catches for almost 900 yards and 10 touchdowns on the year. Could be an interesting round 5-ish, round 6 slot guy for a team. So keep an eye out on Webster. He could be an intriguing day 3 type sleeper. Mario Williams, the former Devy darling, big time recruit, bounced around, Oklahoma, USC. We've talked about him a couple times this year in Tulane. This past week, 7 catches, 130 yards, and a touchdown. Keeps stacking together good weeks, impressive weeks, back on the radar. Expect to see him at either the Shrine Bowl or Senior Bowl. Another interesting guy somewhere on day 3. We talk a lot about Luther Burden all the time. And Theo Weiss feels like he's been in college for like 7 years. But he's another guy. Good ball skills. Can go up and get it at the catch point. Can win vertically with those ball skills and body control. This past week, 4 catches, 100 yards. He's up to 809 yards and 3 touchdowns on the year. And then Jaden Higgins. We've talked about him a couple times this year. 3 catches, 53 yards and a touchdown. He's another guy, I think, crescendo building throughout this year. We kind of expect him to be on that round 3, round 4 bubble, maybe even push his way with a good pre-draft process to even be locked in to the day 2 mix. If we swing this over to the tight end group, Tyler Warren continues to look all world. 6 catches, 68 yards, and a touchdown. I think you can make the case it's a 1A, 1B, but I have flip-flop Tyler Warren and Colston Loveland. I think they both weren't going round 1. I'd be stunned if they're not both off the board within the top 40 to 50 picks. Mitchell Evans, he came in the year with a decent amount of fanfare in Notre Dame. This past week, 5 catches, 59 yards, and a touchdown. He's one of those guys who'll be in that round 4, round 5 mix. Very good college tight end. Might check in as a tight end 2 at the next level, but an intriguing prospect there on day 3. And Caden Prieskorn, 4 catches, 53 yards, and a touchdown. Another interesting guy on that day 3 mix at the tight end position as well. If we take this to the Devy Slant Report, the main thing I want to kind of talk about is the transfer portal, because a couple major names that are not draft eligible have now decided to put their name in the hat to go transfer, and I'm very intrigued to see where they end up. 2 guys are, 1, Kevin Concepcion out of NC State. We talked about him early in the year. I think it was like week 1 or week 2. He had an amazing week. We talked about him in the Devy Slant Report. He's going to be a guy that's in high demand. Could see a team like Colorado. Could totally see Dion going out and getting him. Be the replacement to Travis Hunter. But I think he's going to be in demand from all the major teams. The big programs, your Alabamas, your Georgias. But I do think keep an eye out for Colorado. Could be an interesting spot. And then the other guy is Micah Hudson, formerly of Texas Tech. Was a 5-star, big-time recruit, 6 feet, 203 pounds. Just didn't come materialize this year, but he's going to be in high demand. If people are down on him because this year was kind of never really happened for him, I think now's a good time before we know exactly where he's going to try to get Micah Hudson on your Devy teams. So this is the quick Devy Slant Report, talking about some prospects who we now know are in the transfer mix. I'm sure there's going to be a lot more, even draft-eligible guys. But those are a couple underclassmen, non-draft eligible prospects that I think are pretty big news. Let's spin this over to the NFL Rookie Report for Week 13. Always got to check in with the quarterbacks. Caleb Williams played a great second half for anybody who watched that game on Thanksgiving. Put this team in position to win that game. 256 yards, 3 touchdowns. We're seeing him look much better over the last couple weeks. Obviously, the disaster at the end of that game with time management. Some of it was on his head coach, who's now been fired. Some of it's on Caleb. But if you take that out of the mix, he played really well in the second half of that game against a great football team in the Lions. Drake May had New England on the verge of winning until Anthony Richardson had a different story to finish that game. But Drake May continues to show week in and week out. 239 yards, passing touchdown, almost 60 yards rushing. He's going to be a big time dynasty asset, fantasy asset, and real-life quarterback. If we fast forward a couple years from now, and Drake May has the type of career trajectory of Josh Allen, I know it's a bold statement, but I don't think it would be crazy. Drake May has that Josh Allen type to him, has that Justin Herbert type to him. I've been a big fan of Drake May for years. Anyone who knows me knows he was one of my guys last year. I wanted the Giants to aggressively move up and trade for him and draft him. They tried. Didn't work out. And then Jaden Daniels, after a couple lackluster weeks, Washington rolls this past week. He attributes for 4 touchdowns and plays great, leading the Commanders to a decisive victory this past week. I'm going to skip the running backs because I'm going to bring them up in the overall Dynasty Fantasy Report. A couple of running backs I want to talk about. So let's take this to the pass catchers. With Trevor Lawrence back under center, you saw Brian Thomas, 4 catches, 76 yards, and a touchdown. Continuing to show that he warrants being right up there. Going into the offseason, to make the case, he might be the number 2 wide receiver in Dynasty. If you're not willing to be that bold yet, I'm talking rookies from this past year. If you're not willing to be that bold and put him over Marvin Harrison just yet, I do think it's hard to have Rome Odunze ahead of Brian Thomas after this year. So I think Thomas has done enough to show his big playability, to show more versatility to his game, that I think he warrants top 15, top 20 overall Dynasty wide receiver asset. And the case could be made that he might be the number 2 or number 3 rookie wide receiver from this draft class going into the offseason. Marvin Harrison did have 5 catches, 60 yards, and a touchdown. But I do think, as much as I like his game, the question has to be discussed. Is he going to be this high-end caliber prospect? We haven't seen it yet, for whatever reason. We've seen a couple glimpses. I think that the window is now closed in terms of the separation to some of these other guys. Ladd McConkey continues to put together a very strong rookie year. 9 catches, 117 yards. I do think there's a possibility the Chargers look to get one more big-time wide receiver asset, whether it's in the first 2 rounds of the draft, probably not round 1, knowing Jim Harbaugh, but maybe another day 2 guy, different style wide receiver. But Ladd's been unbelievable this year. Got that inside-outside versatility, great separation quickness, good after the catch. Been a strong rookie year for Ladd McConkey, for Brian Thomas. And then Malik Neighbors hasn't scored since week 3. But I think it's more of a part of the Giants' offense being broken. At some point, I would check in on the Dynasty owner of Malik Neighbors. Make sure he's valuing him as a top 6, 7 Dynasty wide receiver asset. Because if he's not, I would aggressively go try to get him. Giants are going to operate the quarterback position. It's easy to see Malik Neighbors having a great rapport with Shadu Sanders or Cam Ward. And if it's some type of stopgap, it's got to be better than what we've seen this year. Whether it's trade for Kirk Cousins, whether it's Jameis Winston pushing the ball down the field. Something. Sam Darnold. Just throwing out some names. It'll be better for Malik Neighbors next year and it'll be better moving forward once they get a long-term quarterback there. So just make sure that whoever owns him still values him where he should be, which is the top 5 to 8, 5 to 10 overall dynasty wide receiver asset. And then tight end position, Brock Bowers this past week, I mean, it's getting ridiculous. 10 catches, 140 yards, and a touchdown. I mean, the question becomes how early should he be going in startup dynasty drafts? It's probably going to be in the round 1 mix for redraft leagues next year. Probably a round 2 startup dynasty pick. And he warrants it. He's became the focal point. They use him in a variety of ways. He's shown the ability to get open. He's shown the ability to make things happen after the catch. Truly unbelievable rookie season for Brock Bowers on a very poor football team. Very poor quarterback play. Hasn't deterred him at all from putting up stats. Theo Johnson, 5 catches, 54 yards, putting together some quality reps second half of the year. Interesting to see if he can materialize down the line as a fantasy asset in any way, shape, or form for that Giants football team in the years moving forward. And let's take this to the Fantasy Dynasty Report. And it kind of ties right in to the NFL Rookie Report for this week. And just how careful we need to be with running backs in rookie drafts. Because the latest example, kind of a doozy. Usually was, got to be careful with the day 3 running backs, right? Once upon a time, Michael Carter looked good for the Jets. Next came Breece Hall. Once upon a time, Trey Mason looked good for the Rams. A year later, here comes Todd Gurley. Once upon a time, James Robinson looked like a UDFA gem for Jacksonville. After that came Travis Etienne. So you always got to be careful with day 3 running backs. Even if they have, look, Dameon Pierce. The list goes on endlessly. And there's a couple of guys I'll talk about momentarily who fall in that. But I do think their circumstances are a little different. But I can't remember a year where 2 guys went as the first 2 running backs in the class and for different reasons have seen their dynasty stock torpedoed before either one of them really got an opportunity to ever play. And we're talking pretty good draft capital for running backs. Obviously, I'm talking about Jonathan Brooks and Trey Benson. Different circumstances, but similar outcomes. Most people understood that Jonathan Brooks was not going to produce a lot of value this year. But no one was able to foreshadow that Chuba Hubbard was going to come out of nowhere and look this good and get a very solid contract extension. That even if Jonathan Brooks is good next year, completely back from his injury, is it a timeshare? Is it a 60-40 in favor of Hubbard? Is it a 70-30 in favor of Hubbard? That's all on the table now. We can't just assume every dual backfield is going to be David Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs, right? That's fool's gold. Most people who invested in Jonathan Brooks, somewhere between, let's say, pick 5 or 6 to pick 10 in rookie drafts, depending on type of league, stuff like that, envisioned a scenario where this guy had legit RB1 upside. And maybe eventually he does. But we also got to value running backs in a short window. He gave you nothing this year. They gave Hubbard a pretty good deal. You expect him to be there for at least the next 2 years. At any point, can Brooks totally ice him out and get 60, 70% in favor of him? Hard to imagine that with how good Chuba Hubbard played on a bad football team. The other side of this, probably a few picks later in rookie drafts, about 20 picks later in the NFL draft, the Cardinals drafted Trey Benson, my personal RB1 in last year's class. Most people assumed James Conner was in his last year there. Many people assumed by the second half of this year, Benson might have taken a decent chunk of that backfield. But now, not only has James Conner stayed healthy, not only has Trey Benson not been able to materialize even to the standalone RB2 of that team, now they gave James Conner a decent 2-year extension, probably locking him in as their starting running back for at least the next 2 years, bare minimum next year. So now that's probably 2, if not 3 years of Benson's rookie contract that he's not very fantasy valuable without injury. We don't usually see that with rookies, right? We had the unique scenario with Seattle drafting Walker and then the year later Charbonnet. But we don't usually see a second-round running back, early third-round running back, not even get an opportunity. And there were no clear-cut young running back recently drafted, a la the Walker and Charbonnet situation. But that's where we have it here. So their dynasty value is taking a massive, massive hit. And on top of it, we have a great running back class in terms of depth coming in. Where do those guys end up? It might be a year that everyone drafts another running back, so to speak. Which takes me to the other aspect of this. While the early running backs have epically failed, Brooks, Benson, Marshawn Lloyd, Blake Corum, 2 diamonds in the rough on day 3 have materialized to significant dynasty assets right now, and that's Tyrone Tracy and Bucky Irving. But again, comes with a caveat. They're day 3. Now, I do think the Giants like Tyrone Tracy a lot. He's had a little bit of a fumbling issue recently. If they love another running back in round 4, could they consider drafting another one? They only have Tracy and Devin Singletary. They could theoretically have a top 75 grade on a running back who falls to round 4, and they draft them. And then Tracy's with this guy. We can't sit here and say Tyrone Tracy's going to be the guy next year definitively, especially with his draft capital or lack thereof. And then there's Bucky Irving, who has continued to get a bigger work share. But there's still Rachaad White there. Sean Tucker's looked good when he's had an opportunity. Now, I will say, because Rachaad White and Tucker are there, I don't see Tampa Bay investing in another running back. But it's not impossible. But I don't see it. So I think Bucky Irving's a little bit safer than most day 3 running backs are after their rookie year. The Giants have so many holes that I feel a little bit better about Tracy's day 3 value not being torpedoed. But if Joe Shane and Brian Dable get fired, now you're talking about a guy who was drafted by a different regime. And I'm not saying they're going to throw him to the curb, but he's not one of their guys. So there's always some risk with running backs, rookie running backs. There's usually a lot of risk with day 3, I do think Bucky Irvin makes me feel a little bit safer than most years they've successful rookie running backs. And I do think Tyrone Tracy, a guy who I loved, was in my top 5 last year, was a diamond in the rough. Has shown why, but he's had some ball security issues. There could be a regime change in New York. So there comes with some questions there, even though right now you probably can make the case both of them are top 20 dynasty running backs moving forward, just because of the way the landscape of the position looks. But you always got to be careful with those rookie running backs long term. So there it is, guys. Fantasy Dynasty Report, NFL Rookie Report for Week 13, Devy Slant Report, and NFL Draft Report for Week 14 of the college football season. If you're enjoying this content, please get over to the website, S2S Football, fastest and easiest way to get there. Check out the premium content tab. For $9.99, you can get access to all of our premium notebooks. There will be tons and tons of updates coming in December, January, the rest of the pre-draft months to the scouting notebook. You get the rankings notebook, all our different rankings. And then in April, the draft projections notebook as well. Get all of it for $9.99. It is the best way to support what we do here at Saturday, Sunday, and to continue to help us doing what we do here. So, on behalf of our sound tech engineer, David Nakano, and myself, thank you for joining us. And we look forward next time taking you from Saturday to Sunday.